My name is Maya Richardson, and I grew up watching my parents build their sports nutrition empire from the ground up. Some might think being born into a wealthy family meant a life of luxury and ease, but that couldn't be further from the truth. My parents, especially my father, made sure I understood the value of hard work from day one. I can still remember the first time Dad brought me to the office. I was 7, wearing my favorite blue dress with tiny flowers, trying to look as professional as a second grader could. "Maya," he said, setting me up at a small desk near his office, "one day, all of this might be yours. But you'll have to earn it, just like I did." Those words shaped my entire childhood. While other kids spent their summers by the pool, I was learning about inventory management and customer service. Mom sometimes worried I was missing out on being a kid, but I loved every minute of it. The company, Richardson Nutrition, became my second home. College flew by in a blur of business classes and internships at Dad's company. I worked in every department, starting from the warehouse up. No special treatment, that was our deal. The employees who'd known me since childhood watched with approval as I learned the ropes from the ground up. After graduation, I dove headfirst into my role at the company. My days were packed with meetings, reports, and strategy sessions. Dating? That was a foreign concept. My college roommate Sarah used to joke that I was married to my job. Everything changed at the company's annual holiday party. I was running late, as usual, having stayed behind to finish some quarterly reports. When I finally arrived at the venue, the party was in full swing. That's when I saw him, James Cooper, from our Denver branch. Tall, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that made the exhaustion of my 14-hour workday melt away. "You must be Maya," he said, extending his hand. "I've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope?" I laughed, accepting his handshake. "The best. Though they didn't mention you were beautiful." That night, we talked for hours. About work, about family, about our dreams. He seemed to understand me in a way no one else had. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, my heart did a little flip. After James returned to Denver, we started messaging each other constantly. Every morning started with his "good morning, beautiful" text, and every night ended with long conversations about our days. It felt like I'd known him forever. One night, after a particularly long video call, I took a leap. "Why don't you transfer to the main office? We could be together, and it would be great for your career." There was a pause on his end. "Maya, I can't. My family's here in Denver. My parents, my sister, my nephew, we're really close. I couldn't leave them." My heart sank a little, but then he added, "But why don't you come here? The Denver branch could use someone with your expertise." I sat with that thought for a day before approaching Dad in his office. "Daddy, I need your advice. What would you think about me transferring to the Denver branch?" I watched his face carefully as I explained about James. To my surprise, Dad just smiled. "I've been wondering when you'd ask. James has a good reputation in the company, and the Denver branch could use strong leadership. If this is what you want, I'll make it happen." 2 weeks later, I was standing in James's apartment in Denver, surrounded by moving boxes. "Welcome home," he said, wrapping his arms around me. I felt like I was exactly where I should be. The first meeting with his family came sooner than I expected. They all lived together in a modest 2-story house, his parents, Tom and Linda, his sister Rachel, and her teenage son Kyle. I was nervous as we pulled up to their house. "Your family must have a mansion," Linda said the moment I walked in. "This must seem so simple to you." I felt my cheeks flush. "Oh no, not at all. We've always lived pretty normally. No mansions or private jets, just a regular house." "But surely with your family's wealth," Tom started. "I've worked for everything since I was a kid," I explained. "Dad believed in earning your way. I'm more comfortable with simple things, honestly." I caught the disappointed looks they exchanged, but tried to ignore them. Rachel, James's sister, just looked me up and down, eyeing my simple sweater and jeans. If I had your money, I wouldn't be caught dead in anything but designer labels, she said with a smirk. I just shrugged, not knowing how to respond. James squeezed my hand under the table, but said nothing to defend me. 2 months later, James proposed during a walk in the park. It wasn't elaborate, just us, a simple ring, and a heartfelt question. I said yes immediately. When it came to wedding planning, we had our first real disagreement. James wanted something extravagant, a huge venue, hundreds of guests, all the trimmings. Babe, we don't need all that, I argued. Let's do something small and meaningful. He eventually gave in, though not happily. We had a modest ceremony with just immediate family present. But I couldn't help overhearing Linda during the reception, whispering to her sister, I expected something much grander from someone with her background. All this, it's so plain. I pretended not to hear, but their words stung more than I wanted to admit. The ink had barely dried on our marriage certificate when the questions about housing started. We were having Sunday dinner at Tom and Linda's when they brought it up. It was a typical family gathering, Rachel texting on her phone, Kyle playing video games in the corner, and Tom watching sports on TV while we ate. So, Maya, Linda said, passing the mashed potatoes, have you talked to your father about buying you two a house? Something in the Cherry Creek area would be perfect. I was just looking at listings there yesterday, there's this beautiful 5-bedroom with a pool. I nearly choked on my water. Actually, we're planning to save up and buy our own place. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's fork stopped midway to her mouth. Tom muted the TV and turned to stare at me. Linda's face froze in that artificial smile I was beginning to recognize all too well. They exchanged loaded glances that made me feel like I'd said something terribly wrong. But surely your father wouldn't mind. Tom started, wiping his mouth with his napkin. I mean, it's just natural for parents to help their children get started. Especially when they're so capable. I cut him off firmly but politely, sitting up straighter in my chair. James and I want to do this on our own. We're both working, and we can save up. I believe in earning what you have. James reached for my hand under the table, his palm slightly sweaty. I support Maya on this, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Besides, my apartment is perfectly fine for now. I've been renting it for years, and it's in a great location. Linda's eyes lit up suddenly, like she'd just had a brilliant idea. She set down her wine glass with a little too much force. Well, if you're staying in the apartment, Maya should pay the rent. After all, she makes quite a bit more than you do, James. It's only fair. I watched as my husband nodded in agreement, a little too quickly for my comfort. That makes sense, he said, not meeting my eyes. It's $3,000 a month. The amount took me by surprise. Denver wasn't cheap, but that seemed high for our neighborhood. Still, I didn't want to create waves. The tension in the room was already thick enough to cut with a knife. Sure, that's fair, I said, trying to keep my voice light. So our routine was established. Every month, I'd give James $3,000, and he'd handle the rent payment. Sometimes I'd see him making the transfer on his phone, always quick to close the screen if I walked by. It went on like this for a while until one day, a thought occurred to me while I was reviewing our monthly expenses. Hey, I said one evening while we were having dinner in our kitchen, the sounds of the city drifting in through the open window, since I'm paying the rent now, maybe I should take over the lease? We could put it in my name. It would make sense for tax purposes. James's reaction was immediate and strange. He tensed up, nearly dropping his fork onto his half-eaten pasta. His face paled slightly. No, that wouldn't work, he said quickly, his voice higher than usual. I've been renting from Mr. Johnson for years. He trusts me. We don't want to mess with a good thing. Something about his reaction bothered me deeply. The way his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine, the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his water glass. But I pushed the feeling aside, like I'd been doing with so many little things lately. Life in Denver had fallen into a routine. I was settling into my role at the branch office, managing my team, and having weekly video calls with mom and dad. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. But there was one issue that kept gnawing at me. It happened for the first time on a Tuesday. I came home from work early with a headache, only to find Linda and Rachel sitting on my couch, watching my TV, eating the expensive salmon I'd bought for James's birthday dinner. "Oh, Maya," Linda said, not even getting up. "We were just having a little snack." I stood there, keys still in hand, staring at them. They had their shoes up on my coffee table, magazines scattered everywhere, and my kitchen looked like a tornado had hit it. This became a regular occurrence. I'd come home to find them there, or worse, come home to evidence they'd been there, empty food containers, things moved around, my closet clearly rifled through. They had keys. Of course they had keys. One evening, I tried talking to James about it. "Honey, don't you think it's a bit strange that your mom and sister just come in whenever they want?" He barely looked up from his phone. "They're family, Maya. You're being dramatic, just calm down." But I couldn't calm down. Not when I found them going through my personal papers one afternoon, giggling over my diary from college that they'd discovered in a box I hadn't unpacked yet. "We need to talk," I said firmly, my hands shaking slightly. "This isn't okay. You can't just come into our home without asking. You can't go through our things." Linda's face crumpled instantly. Tears sprang to her eyes like someone had turned on a faucet. "How dare you," she wailed. "After everything we've done to welcome you into our family. I knew you were too good for us, with your fancy background." As if on cue, James walked in. He took in the scene, his mother sobbing, Rachel glaring at me, and me standing there in shock. "What did you do?" he demanded, rushing to his mother's side. "She's trying to keep us away from you," Linda cried into his shoulder. "She says we're not welcome here anymore." "That's not what I started," but James cut me off. "How could you treat them like this? They're my family." After they left, James turned on me. His face was hard in a way I'd never seen before. "You need to fix this," he said. "Buy them something nice, really nice, and apologize." The next day, I went shopping after work. I bought Linda a designer handbag she'd been hinting about, and Rachel a pair of expensive boots. My hands felt dirty as I wrapped them. When I delivered the gifts to their house, they accepted them with smug smiles. "We knew you'd come around," Linda said, not even looking at me as she examined the handbag. "These will do," Rachel added, trying on the boots. That night, James finally spoke to me again. "See, was that so hard?" he asked, kissing my cheek. But something had changed. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on yet. After the boundary incident, things got worse in ways I hadn't imagined possible. Linda and Rachel turned gift demanding into an art form. Every minor holiday became an occasion for expectations. "Maya, you know it's National Sisters' Day next week," Rachel would text. "I saw this beautiful Gucci bag. It's the anniversary of when I first held James as a baby," Linda would announce. "I think a spa weekend would be appropriate to mark the occasion." The requests were endless: Mother's Day, birthday, Christmas, Easter, Valentine's Day, Labor Day, Memorial Day, even Groundhog Day became an excuse. When I hesitated about buying Linda a $500 scarf for Arbor Day, she burst into tears during family dinner. "I guess some people just don't understand family loyalty," she sniffled, while Rachel patted her back. "Even after we've welcomed her so warmly." "Maya," James said later that night, "why do you have to be so difficult? They're your family now too." "But James, don't you think this is getting out of hand? Last week, your mom wanted a designer watch because it was National Ice Cream Day." He just shrugged. "If you can afford it, why not help family?" As if the situation wasn't stressful enough, Kyle, Rachel's 15-year-old son, started showing up at our apartment more frequently. At first, I tried to be understanding. All teenagers go through difficult phases, right? But Kyle took teenage attitude to new heights. One evening, I spent hours making my grandmother's special lasagna recipe. Kyle took one bite and pushed the plate away. "This is garbage," he declared. "Mom says you probably can't cook because you grew up with servants doing everything for you." I gripped my fork tighter. "Kyle, that's not appropriate." "Whatever," he cut me off. "I need $60 for the movies with my friends." When I refused, he kicked the kitchen chair. "You're loaded. Stop being such a miser. Mom says you're just playing poor to feel superior." That night, I tried talking to James about Kyle's behavior. We were getting ready for bed, and I was hoping he'd finally see reason. "Honey, Kyle was really disrespectful today. Could you maybe talk to him?" James didn't even look up from his phone. "You need to handle it yourself. Think of it as practice, we'll have our own kids someday. You need to learn how to deal with these situations." The next day, Kyle showed up again, loudly demanding money for a new video game. When I said no, he sprawled across our couch, turned the TV volume up to maximum, and started making pointed comments about fake humble rich people. I looked at my husband, hoping for support, but he just walked out of the room, leaving me alone with his smirking nephew. In that moment, standing in my own living room while a teenager openly disrespected me, I felt more alone than I ever had before. 2 years. It's amazing how much can change in 2 years. Or maybe how much you can convince yourself that things will get better if you just try hard enough, be patient enough, give enough. "I'm going to visit Mom and Dad this weekend," I told James over breakfast one morning. "Want to come?" He barely glanced up from his phone. "Can't. Promised Mom and Dad I'd help them with some stuff around the house." The drive to my parents' house was peaceful. Mom made my favorite lasagna, Dad told his terrible dad jokes, and for a few hours, I felt like myself again. Like the Maya who used to know exactly who she was and what she wanted. But life has a way of shattering peace into a million pieces. When I opened the door to our apartment Sunday evening, the stench hit me first: stale beer and pizza, and something worse. Empty cans littered every surface. Cigarette butts floated in half-empty Solo cups. Pizza boxes made a greasy tower on my coffee table. And there, sprawled across my living room like they owned it, were Kyle and 5 other teenagers, passed out among the wreckage of what had clearly been one hell of a party. "Get up," I shouted, my voice shaking with rage. "All of you, out. Now." The teenagers startled awake, scrambling to gather their things. All except Kyle, who stretched lazily and looked at me with that familiar smirk. Why should I leave? I live here now. I felt my blood pressure rising. "Excuse me?" "Had a fight with Mom and Grandma," he said, reaching for a half-empty beer can. "Decided this was better than their rules. Uncle James said I could crash here. We rent this apartment, we may have problems," I said through gritted teeth. "Give me your keys. Now." Kyle laughed. Actually laughed. "Rent this apartment? That's funny. This is Uncle James's apartment. Has been since Great-Grandpa left it to him." The room started spinning. "What are you talking about?" "The apartment. It's his. Always has been. Got it when Great-Grandpa died 5 years ago. Everyone knows that." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. 2 years of rent payments. Every time I'd suggested putting the lease in my name, every time he'd dodged the question, every time he'd quickly hidden his phone when making the rent transfer. It had all been a lie. I must have looked like I was about to collapse, because Kyle's whole demeanor changed. The cocky teenager disappeared, replaced by someone who looked almost sympathetic. "Look," he said, awkwardly patting my shoulder, "there's something else you should know." He pulled out his phone, fidgeting with it. "I've been recording some of their conversations. Started doing it when they were talking shit about me, but, well, they talk about you a lot too." James's laugh came through the speaker first. That laugh I used to love. "It's perfect," he was saying. $3,000 a month, straight into my pocket. She doesn't even question it." My stomach churned as Kyle played recording after recording. Each one worse than the last. Keep talking about family loyalty, Rachel was saying. She'll cave every time. Got a new Prada bag out of her last week. Just make sure you get her pregnant soon, Linda's voice again. Once there's a baby, her daddy will have to buy you two a house. No way he'll let his grandchild live in an apartment. But the worst was yet to come. Kyle hesitated before playing the next one. She's such an idiot, James's voice, slightly slurred. Can't even satisfy me in bed. Thank God for Amanda. And Julie. And what's her name from accounting? Just be careful, honey, Linda again. Don't let Maya catch you. At least not until we've squeezed every penny we can out of her. The phone slipped from my numb fingers. Kyle caught it. Could you? My voice cracked. Could you send those to me? He nodded, quickly tapping on his phone. I heard the notification sounds on mine as the files came through. Kyle stood up, gathering his things. At the door, he turned back. I'm sorry, he said quietly. They're all snakes, you know? Always have been, even Mom. He shrugged. Guess that's why they hate me so much. I can't pretend like they do. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in the trashed apartment. Alone with the truth about my marriage. About my husband. About the past 2 years of my life. I didn't bother cleaning up the mess in the apartment. Let it be a perfect metaphor for my marriage, a beautiful facade hiding absolute garbage underneath. Instead, I got in my car and drove straight to Linda and Tom's house, where I knew they'd all be having their Sunday family dinner. They were all there, exactly as I'd pictured them, James, Linda, Tom, and Rachel, gathered around the dining table like some Norman Rockwell painting of family unity. The scene made me sick. Maya. Linda's fake smile appeared instantly. We weren't expecting you. How was your parents' house? I ignored her completely, fixing my eyes on James. Show me the rental agreement for our apartment. The room went silent. James's fork paused halfway to his mouth. What? The rental agreement. The lease. Show it to me. He recovered quickly, plastering on that charming smile I'd once loved. Oh, honey, you know Mr. Johnson doesn't do formal contracts. We've known each other for years. Mr. Johnson doesn't exist, I cut him off. The apartment belongs to you. Always has. Linda jumped in quickly, her voice high and nervous. Maya, dear, would you like some pot roast? I tried that recipe you mentioned. Shut up, Linda. My voice was ice cold. They all stared at me in shock. I'd never spoken to any of them like that before. James, what have you been doing with my $3,000 every month for the past 2 years? He chuckled, but I could see sweat breaking out on his forehead. Come on, Maya, it's not a big deal. So I own the apartment, what difference does it make? We're married. What difference? I pulled out my phone. Let's see what difference it makes. The color drained from their faces as James's voice filled the room. It's perfect. $3,000 a month, straight into my pocket. She doesn't even question it. I played recording after recording. Their own voices condemned them. The plotting, the manipulation, the mockery. James's boasts about his mistresses. Linda and Rachel's schemes for extracting gifts. Their plans for getting me pregnant to secure more money from my father. When I finally stopped the playback, you could have heard a pin drop. James was ghost white. Rachel looked like she might throw up. Linda's carefully maintained makeup couldn't hide her terror. I'm divorcing you, I said to James, my voice steady. Expect the papers this week. If you try to contact me for anything other than the divorce proceedings, these recordings go public. I'm sure the business community would love to hear how you scammed your wife out of $72,000. I turned and walked out, their protests falling on deaf ears. I drove back to the apartment, his apartment, and packed my things methodically, efficiently. By sunset, my car was loaded, and I was on my way to my parents' house. Mom and Dad were still up when I arrived. One look at my face and they knew something was terribly wrong. I told them everything, showing them the recordings. Dad's face grew darker with each revelation. "I'll handle this," he said when I finished, and he did. James was fired the next day, and Dad made sure his reputation in the business world was thoroughly destroyed. The divorce proceedings were quick. James tried to fight it at first, but the recordings changed everything. The judge was particularly interested in the financial fraud aspect. James walked away with nothing but his apartment and his ruined reputation. 3 months later, I was back at headquarters, throwing myself into work, slowly rebuilding my life. That's when I got a text from Kyle. We met for coffee. He looked different, more mature, less angry. "I got a job at the car wash," he told me. "Moved out of Mom's house after they found out I was the one who gave you the recordings. Best decision I ever made." "I could help you," I offered. "Get you a position at the company." He shook his head, smiling slightly. "Thanks, but I need to do this on my own. Clean slate, you know? Besides, I'm saving up for community college." I understood completely. Sometimes the only way forward is to leave everything behind and build something new, something true, from the ground up. That night, I stood in my new apartment, my actual rental, with a real lease in my name, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same person who fell for James's charm 2 years ago. She was stronger, wiser, and finally, genuinely free. I picked up my phone and deleted their numbers one by one. The last light of day caught the diamond on my ring finger, my grandmother's ring now, not the one James had given me, and scattered into 1,000 points of light. Outside my window, the city was coming alive with evening energy, full of possibilities and new beginnings. I was ready for mine. My name is Sandra, and I'm the second child in a family of retail workers. My parents were always busy, rushing between work and various development courses they attended with my older brother. As for me? Well, I was the afterthought. From my earliest memories, it was clear who the star of our family show was. My brother got everything first, the newest toys, the latest gadgets, all the attention. Me? I got his hand-me-downs. And yes, that included his clothes, which was particularly tough since, you know, I was a girl who desperately wanted to wear something feminine for once. The only real bright spot in my childhood was my grandmother, Mom's mother. She was my saving grace, picking me up from school every day and taking me to her house. Unlike my parents, who were always too busy with my brother's activities, Grandma actually cared about my life. "How was school today, sweetheart?" she'd ask, her eyes twinkling with genuine interest as we walked home. "Did you learn anything exciting?" She was the one who showed up at parent-teacher meetings, who checked my homework, who actually knew what was happening in my life. While my parents were busy playing Monopoly with my brother, their favorite family activity that somehow never included me, I'd be sent off to watch cartoons alone. "Sandra, honey, why don't you go watch TV?" Mom would say whenever I tried to join their game. "The rules are too complicated for you." That was pretty much how things went in our house. I learned early on to be self-sufficient, cooking my own lunch, cleaning my room, doing my homework without help. It wasn't that my parents were bad people, they just had their golden child, and it wasn't me. But looking back now, I can see how those early experiences shaped me. While they were grooming my brother to be their future business prodigy, I was developing independence and self-reliance. I learned to take care of myself, to find my own path, and most importantly, to recognize the value of having someone like my grandmother in my corner. Everything changed the day I bought that superhero comic book. I'd saved up my pocket money for weeks, counting every penny until I finally had enough. Standing in front of the magazine rack, I felt like I was about to discover a whole new world, and I was right. "Are you sure you want to spend your money on that?" the store clerk asked, probably used to kids buying candy instead. "Yes, I'm sure," I replied, clutching my precious purchase. That night, I couldn't sleep. The artwork in the comic book was mesmerizing. I found myself tracing the lines with my fingers, studying how the artists created movement and emotion with just ink and paper. The next morning, I grabbed some notebook paper and started drawing. At first, my sketches were rough, stick figures with wobbly lines. But I practiced every chance I got. During lunch breaks, after homework, even during some classes, sorry, math teacher. Soon, my drawing started improving, and that's when an idea hit me. Hey, what if we created our own superhero? I suggested to my friends during lunch one day. Someone different from the usual ones. Like what? My friend Lisa asked, genuinely interested. What about a hero who helps homeless animals and kids in need? I suggested, already sketching in my notebook. No fancy superpowers, just someone who actually cares. My friends loved it. We started working on it together, coming up with stories during lunch breaks. I'd draw rough sketches, and we'd all contribute ideas. Our hero became real to us, a regular person who chose to make a difference. Ms. Thompson, our homeroom teacher, caught us passing around our latest comic story during class one day. Instead of getting angry, she asked to see it. I nervously handed over our work, expecting detention. Sandra, this is remarkable, she said, flipping through the pages. Would you consider doing something like this for the school newspaper? Before I knew it, our little comic was appearing in the school paper. Other students started coming up to me in the hallways, asking about the next installment. For the first time in my life, I was known for something I'd created, not as someone's sister. My brother noticed the attention I was getting. It's just some dumb drawings, he'd mutter at home, clearly annoyed that people were talking about me instead of him. Then came career day. Ms. Thompson asked everyone what they wanted to be when they grew up. Without thinking, I stood up and said, a designer. The whole class erupted in support. That makes so much sense. Your art is amazing. You'd be perfect for that. Ms. Thompson smiled warmly. With your talent and dedication, I think that's a wonderful choice, Sandra. I was so excited that I couldn't wait to tell my parents. That evening at dinner, I shared my dream. A designer? Mom laughed, exchanging looks with Dad. Honey, that's not a real career path. If you want to be successful, Dad added, you need to think like an entrepreneur. Look at your brother, he already understands business principles. But I don't want to do business, I protested. I want to create things. Creating things won't pay the bills, Mom dismissed my dream with a wave of her hand. You need to be practical. Hurt and disappointed, I went to the one person I knew would understand, Grandma. When I showed her my drawings and told her about my dreams, her eyes lit up. My talented girl, she said, hugging me tight. Wait right here. The next day, she surprised me with an easel, real canvases, and a set of professional paints. But that wasn't all, she cleared out her spare room, transforming it into a proper art studio just for me. Time moved on, and my brother graduated from high school with all the fanfare you'd expect. The graduation party my parents threw for him was extravagant, they invited the whole family and all his friends. I still remember the day he announced his college plans at dinner, right after the festivities had died down. I got accepted into the economics program, he declared proudly, waving his acceptance letter. I'm going to be the richest businessman this family has ever seen. Just watch me. That's our boy, Dad beamed, raising his glass. Now that's what I call planning for the future. You'll make us all proud. Mom wiped away happy tears. We always knew you were destined for great things. Meanwhile, I was in my final years of high school, splitting my time between regular classes and developing my art portfolio. My little studio at Grandma's had become my sanctuary, walls covered with sketches and paintings. Every new piece felt like another step toward my dream of becoming a designer. I'd spend hours there after school, perfecting my techniques and working on new projects. When graduation finally came around, I'd already been accepted into the design program at the local college. My portfolio had impressed the admissions committee, but my parents' reaction was less than enthusiastic. Well, Mom sighed, looking at my acceptance letter like it was a bill she didn't want to pay. I suppose we'll pay for it. But don't come crying to us when you can't find a job. Art degrees aren't exactly practical. By the time I started college, my brother had already graduated and opened his own auto parts store. My parents couldn't stop talking about it. Every family dinner, every phone call, every conversation somehow circled back to his entrepreneurial spirit. I was just starting to feel comfortable in my college routine, really diving into my design projects and making friends with like-minded creative people, when everything exploded. My parents showed up unannounced one day after my design theory class, catching me as I was walking across campus with my portfolio case. "Sandra, we need to talk," Mom said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a casual visit. Her face had that determined look I'd learned to dread over the years. "You need to leave college," Dad announced without preamble, standing in the middle of the campus walkway. "Your brother needs help at the store." I thought they were joking at first. "What? You can't be serious." "He's spending too much on employee salaries," Mom explained, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. "As his sister, you can work for free. It's the least you can do for family. We've always taught you the importance of family." They laid out their plan in excruciating detail. I'd work as a salesperson, handle inventory, make cold calls, and clean the store every evening. All without pay, of course. They'd clearly thought this through, though they hadn't thought about what I wanted at all. "And what exactly will my brother be doing while I'm doing all this work?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. I could feel my hands cramping around my portfolio case, my knuckles turning white from the grip. Mom's expression brightened, as if she was explaining something wonderful to a particularly slow child. "He'll be managing the store, of course. He has a business degree, Sandra. He's qualified to run things. Your brother has studied for this." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the rage building inside me. "I'm not dropping out. I've already done an internship at Davidson Design Studio, and they've hinted at a position after graduation. That's what I want, to work as a designer. They even said they've never had an intern with my level of creativity." Mom's laugh cut through the air like a knife. It was loud enough to make nearby students turn and stare, some of them giving me sympathetic looks. "Oh, honey. You want to work for someone else's uncle? Be someone's employee? We're offering you a family business, a real future. Do you know how many people would kill for this opportunity?" "Mom, please," I pleaded, fighting back tears. My portfolio felt heavy in my hands, filled with projects I'd poured my heart into. "I don't want to be a salesperson. I don't want to run a business. I want to draw. I want to create. I'm good at it. My professors say I have real talent. Professor Jenkins even said I could have a real future in this field." "Talent doesn't pay bills," Mom snapped, her face hardening. "But since you're being stubborn about this..." She straightened her jacket and turned to Dad. "We're going to the administration office right now. We'll tell them you're no longer a student here and that we're withdrawing our tuition payment." My heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt sideways. "Mom, Dad, please don't do this. Please just listen to me for once. This is my future we're talking about." "There's nothing to discuss," Mom said coldly. "You either come work at the store, or we stop paying for this hobby of yours. It's time you grew up and faced reality." Through my tears, I watched my parents' figures getting smaller as they walked away, heading to dismantle my future. The autumn leaves swirled around them as they disappeared into the building. 45 minutes later, they emerged, looking pleased with themselves. They spotted me still sitting on the bench and walked over, triumphant smiles on their faces. "Well, that's taken care of," Mom announced brightly. "We've signed the withdrawal papers and canceled the tuition payments. You're officially no longer a student here starting next semester. Time to pack up your things and come home," Dad added, as if he was telling me about a surprise party. "Your brother needs you at the store first thing Monday morning." "Welcome to the real world, Sandra," Mom said, patting my shoulder. Trust me, you'll look back on this day and realize we did you a favor. Now let's go home, you have a lot of packing to do." They turned and walked away, leaving me sitting there with my now useless portfolio and shattered dreams. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and called the one person who had never let me down. "Grandma," I sobbed into the phone. "They're making me leave college." They went to the administration and... "Slow down, sweetheart," her calm voice came through. "Tell me everything." Through tears, I explained the situation, the store, my brother's needs, my parents' ultimatum, everything. Grandma listened quietly, only occasionally making small sounds of disapproval. "Don't pack a single thing," she said firmly when I finished. "I'm coming down there tomorrow. This nonsense stops now. You just focus on your studies." True to her word, Grandma arrived 3 days later. I didn't go with her to the administration building, I was too nervous, but when she came out 2 hours later, she was smiling. "It's all taken care of," she announced. "I paid for the rest of your education. You're staying right where you belong." I hugged her so tight I thought I might break something. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." The peace lasted exactly 6 hours, and all this time, Grandma spent time with me. That's when Mom called her. "How dare you interfere?" I could hear Mom's voice screaming through the phone from across the room. "This is none of your business." Grandma held the phone away from her ear, rolling her eyes. "It became my business when you tried to destroy your daughter's future." The yelling continued for several minutes before Grandma simply hung up. Then my phone started ringing. "If you don't come to your senses right now," Mom's voice was ice cold, "you can consider yourself disinherited." "Is that what you want? To throw away your family for some art classes?" I took a deep breath, my hand steady for the first time in days. "I'm staying in college, Mom." "I'm sorry, but I have to follow my own path." "Then you're no daughter of mine." The line went dead. An hour later, I saw the Facebook post, heartbroken. "Our own daughter has abandoned her family in our time of need. She's chosen selfish pursuits over family loyalty. Please pray for us during this difficult time." The comments section exploded. Aunt Sarah wrote, "I always knew she was an ungrateful child." Uncle Jim countered with, "Let the girl follow her dreams." Cousin Rachel chimed in about family obligations, while my high school friend Emma defended my right to choose my own path. I sat on my bed, reading comment after comment, feeling sick to my stomach. Grandma found me there, still scrolling through the reactions. "Stop reading that garbage," she said firmly, taking my phone away. "You know what? I've made a decision. I'm changing my will, everything I have is going to you." I looked up, startled. "Grandma, no, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted. "I've watched your parents and brother long enough. They'd burn through my life savings in a month on another half-baked business scheme. But you," she cupped my face in her hands, "you have real talent and drive. You'll make something of yourself." Life has a funny way of proving people right or wrong. I was deep into my final year of college when Grandma called with the news about my brother's store. "It's closing down," she said, trying to keep the "I told you so" out of her voice. "Your brother couldn't make the numbers work." "What happened?" I asked, though I already had a pretty good idea. "Same old story, more money going out than coming in. But here's the kicker." She paused for dramatic effect. "He's already got another brilliant business idea." Sure enough, a week later, my brother's Facebook status lit up with excitement, proud to announce my newest venture. Opening Ink Master Studios with my buddy Mike. Best tattoo parlor in town, coming soon. Entrepreneur, business owner, success. I couldn't help but notice he'd used the artist emoji, when he'd always mocked my artistic pursuits. Grandma kept me updated on the family drama. "Your parents took out another loan against what's left of their equity," she told me during one of our weekly dinners. "They're funding this tattoo parlor scheme now. Second mortgage, if you can believe it." The tattoo parlor started off with a big grand opening party. My brother posted daily photos of their luxury space, way too big for a starter business, but he always did think bigger was better. Their social media was full of professional-looking photos of the expensive furniture and top-of-the-line equipment. But then the posts started changing. More and more of them featured free tattoos for influencers and promotional work. Especially, as Grandma noted with a snort, for pretty girls who caught my brother's or Mike's eye. It took exactly 1 year for the tattoo parlor to go under. Too much overhead, too many freebies, not enough paying customers. The going out of business sign went up without any social media fanfare. Meanwhile, my life was taking a very different direction. I graduated with honors, my final portfolio stronger than I could have imagined when I first started college. The day after graduation, I got the call I'd been hoping for. "We'd love to have you join our team," said Sarah, the creative director at Davidson Design Studio. "Your internship work was exceptional, and your current portfolio, well, let's just say we'd be crazy to let you go elsewhere." The salary they offered was more than I'd expected for a starting position. Within a month, I'd found a small but charming apartment of my own. It wasn't fancy, just a one-bedroom with good natural light for my artwork space, but it was mine. Every payday, I put a portion of my salary into savings. After watching my family's financial drama unfold, I was determined to build a secure future for myself. My first big project at the firm got rave reviews from the client, and I could feel my professional reputation growing. "See?" Grandma said when I showed her my first big client presentation. "This is what happens when you stick to your guns and follow your talent." The house of cards my parents had built finally came crashing down. 2 business loans, both secured against their house, became impossible to pay when my brother's ventures failed. I heard they're selling the house from Grandma during our weekly calls. Even after selling the house, they were still underwater. They started selling everything else: Mom's precious antique collection, Dad's beloved golf clubs, their matching luxury cars, even Mom's designer handbags she'd been so proud of. The real shock came when my brother announced he was moving to Arizona. "Can't help with the loans," he told them. "Those are in your names, not mine. I need a fresh start." I was at Grandma's house one Sunday afternoon, helping her organize her craft room, when a moving truck pulled up outside. Through the window, I watched in disbelief as my parents climbed out of their now ancient Toyota, the only vehicle they had left. "We're here," Mom announced, walking straight through Grandma's front door without knocking. "Where should we put our things?" Grandma stood in her hallway, arms crossed. "And what exactly do you think you're doing?" "Moving in, of course," Dad said, already directing movers with their boxes. "We have nowhere else to go." "Oh, really?" Grandma's voice could have frozen hell. "And who said you could live here?" Mom looked shocked. "Mom, we're your family. You can't turn us away. We lost everything because of those loans." "You mean the loans you took out to finance your precious son's half-baked schemes?" Grandma's eyebrow arched. "The same son who abandoned you to your debts." "Well," Mom said, lifting her chin, "it doesn't matter. I'm your only daughter, I'll inherit this house anyway. We might as well move in now." Grandma's laugh was sharp and cold. "Is that what you think? Let me clear something up for you right now. Every penny I have, every brick in this house, is going to Sandra. I've seen how you handle money. You and your son would burn through my life savings in months." Mom's face contorted with rage as she processed Grandma's words. Then she turned on me, her finger pointing accusingly. "You," she spat. "You planned this all along, didn't you? Turning my own mother against me, stealing my inheritance like a common thief." I stood there, feeling strangely calm in the face of her fury. Years ago, this would have reduced me to tears, but not anymore. "Mom, you need to leave." "Leave?" she shrieked. "Listen to you. Acting like you own this place already. Who do you think you are, giving orders in your grandmother's house?" Mom was on a roll now, years of resentment pouring out. "You ungrateful little snake. First you abandon the family business, then you turn my mother against me, and now you're standing there acting like you're better than us? Mom, I said quietly, please leave. This isn't your house, and you're not welcome here. Not welcome? She laughed hysterically. I'm her daughter, her only daughter, and you're just... Before she could finish, Grandma stepped forward and wrapped her arm around my shoulders. She's the only person who's ever felt truly at home here, she said firmly. The only one who appreciated this house for more than its monetary value. The only one who filled it with creativity and joy instead of schemes and demands. Now, both of you, get out of my house. And take your boxes with you. They left, but not quietly. Mom cursed and ranted all the way down the driveway, while Dad tried to negotiate until the very end. Through it all, Grandma and I stood in the doorway, watching them load their boxes back into the truck. That was 3 years ago. Life has moved forward, as it tends to do. I'm still at Davidson Design Studio, where I've been promoted to lead designer on several major accounts. My latest project, rebranding a national coffee chain, just won an industry award. I haven't spoken to my parents or my brother since that day at Grandma's house. Sometimes I see posts from my brother on social media. He's always starting some new venture, always claiming this one will be his big break. My parents, I hear through family gossip, are living in a small apartment on the other side of town. But Grandma and I have only grown closer. Last month, I used some of my savings to help renovate her house. I designed everything myself, new color schemes, custom artwork for the walls, even some unique furniture pieces I commissioned from local artisans. Grandma loves showing it off to her friends. My granddaughter did all this, she tells everyone who visits. She designed everything herself. Didn't she do a wonderful job? Sometimes, when she's hosting her bridge club or her garden society meetings, I sit in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I used to do my homework after school, and listen to her proudly giving tours. It makes me smile every time. Yesterday, as we sat on her newly redesigned back porch, drinking tea and watching the sunset, she turned to me with a twinkle in her eye. You know what the best investment I ever made was? She asked. What's that? Paying for your college education, she said, squeezing my hand. Some people invest in stocks or real estate. I invested in your dreams. And look how well that turned out. I couldn't argue with that. Looking around at the beautiful space we'd created together, I felt completely at peace with all my choices. My name's Daisy, and this is the story of how I learned that family isn't always blood, and sometimes the people who should love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. I came into this world as an unwelcome surprise to my parents, fresh out of college with stars in their eyes and careers on their minds. When my mom found out she was pregnant, she wanted an abortion. It wasn't the right time, they weren't ready, all that jazz. But my grandparents had other ideas. See, they were loaded, and they'd been bankrolling my parents' lives. When they caught wind of the pregnancy, they laid down the law, have the baby, or kiss the gravy train goodbye. From day one, I was an afterthought. My mom couldn't wait to get back to work, leaving me with a revolving door of nannies and my grandmothers. Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for the care they gave me, but it wasn't the same as having real parents. As I grew older, my grandparents started to back off. They'd done their duty, keeping me alive and all, and now they were off to enjoy their golden years in exotic locales. Can't blame them, I guess. But it left me even more alone. By the time I was 7, I was practically raising myself. I knew how to cook basic meals, do my own laundry, and get myself ready for school. It wasn't ideal, but it was my normal. Then, everything changed. My mom got pregnant again. This time, it was different. My parents were ready, excited even. They'd climbed the corporate ladder, made names for themselves. Now they could afford to be parents, or so they thought. When my sister was born, it was like the sun had finally risen in our house. My parents were over the moon, cooing and fawning over her like she was made of gold. And I was pushed even further into the shadows. As the years went by, the difference in how we were treated became more and more obvious. My sister got the best of everything: toys, clothes, attention. If she wanted something, she got it. If she did something wrong, it was brushed off with a laugh and a kids will be kids. Me? I learned not to ask for things. I wore hand-me-downs and made do with what I had. If I screwed up, it was met with disappointment and lectures about responsibility. Don't get me wrong, we weren't poor. Far from it. My parents were doing well, really well. But in their eyes, I was already grown, already independent. Why waste money on me when my sister needed it more? I threw myself into my studies. If I couldn't have their love, I'd have their respect. I got top grades, joined every club I could, stayed out of trouble. But it was never enough. They'd nod absently when I showed them my report card, then turn back to my sister's finger-painting masterpiece. By the time high school rolled around, I was counting the days until I could leave. I applied to colleges in secret, not telling my parents until I'd already been accepted. When I finally got into one of the best colleges, I packed my bags and left without a word. It took them 3 days to notice I was gone. 3 whole days. And even then, it was only because my mom wanted some yogurt. When she called, her voice was casual, like she was asking about the weather. "Daisy, could you pick up some low-calorie yogurt from the health food store on your way home?" I almost laughed. Here I was, starting a new chapter of my life, and all she cared about was yogurt. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm not at home. I've been at college for 3 days now. I'm living in the dorms." There was a moment of silence on the other end. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, trying to process this information. Then, without a hint of remorse or concern, she said, "Oh. Well, if you come back, you'll have to stay at a hotel. We've given your room to your sister." Life at college was a breath of fresh air. But money was tight. My parents didn't offer any financial support. But my grandparents, bless their hearts, came through for me. They sent me small amounts regularly, just enough to keep me afloat. It wasn't much, but it meant everything to me. Not just the money, but the fact that someone in my family actually cared. "Daisy, dear," my grandmother would say during our infrequent phone calls, "we're so proud of you. You focus on your studies, all right? Don't worry about anything else." Those words were like a balm to my soul. I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, determined not to let them down. I couldn't work part-time like many of my classmates, the course load was too heavy, and I was determined to excel. So I pinched pennies, lived on ramen more often than not, and made every cent count. Meanwhile, life back home continued without me. My sister, the golden child, was struggling in school. Not that it mattered to my parents, they hired the best tutors money could buy, showered her with rewards for the slightest improvement, and made excuses for her every failure. By my senior year, companies were already lining up to recruit me. My professors sang my praises, my resume was impeccable, and I had my pick of job offers. But none of them felt quite right. I wanted more. I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe, just maybe, to my family, that I could make it on my own terms. So I took a leap of faith. I applied to a prestigious international company in Europe. It was a long shot, but I figured I had nothing to lose. When the acceptance email came, I nearly fell out of my chair. This was it. My ticket to a new life, a fresh start. I graduated with honors, my grandparents beaming proudly in the audience. My parents? They sent a generic congratulations card. My sister didn't even bother with that. But I didn't care. I was beyond seeking their approval. As I packed my bags for Europe, I thought about calling my parents to say goodbye. In the end, I decided against it. What was there to say? They'd made it clear where I stood in their lives. Instead, I hugged my grandparents tight, promising to call and write often. Life in Europe was everything I'd hoped for and more. Every now and then, I'd call my parents. Old habits die hard, I guess. But each conversation was like pulling teeth. They'd give monosyllabic answers, always too busy or too distracted to really talk. And they never, not once, called me. Then I met Marco. He was in the marketing department, all charm and quick wit, with a smile that could light up a room. We started as colleagues, became friends, and before I knew it, we were falling in love. When Marco proposed on a moonlit beach in Positano, I didn't hesitate. We decided to have the wedding in Italy. "We should go tell your parents in person," Marco said one night as we pored over wedding plans. "And invite them properly. It's the right thing to do." So we flew back to the States, armed with wedding invitations and hope. Foolish hope, as it turned out. From the moment we walked into my childhood home, it was clear we weren't welcome. My parents were cold, distracted. They barely looked at Marco, barely acknowledged our news. "Oh, that's nice," my mother said, her eyes on her phone. "We're terribly busy though. Your sister's new apartment needs work, and we're overseeing the renovations." We stayed for a week. A long, uncomfortable week. My parents were hardly ever home, always at my sister's new place. But my sister? She was always around, always watching, always there. I saw the way she looked at Marco. The flutter of her eyelashes, the coy smiles. It made my stomach churn. "Marco," she cooed one evening, "I'd love your opinion on the color scheme for my bedroom. Why don't you come up and take a look?" I saw the discomfort on Marco's face. "I don't think," he started, but I cut him off. "That's enough," I snapped at my sister. "He's my fiancé. Back off." Her face crumpled into a pout. "I was just being friendly," she whined. "God, Daisy, you're so selfish. You always want everything for yourself." She stormed off, no doubt to cry to our parents. And sure enough, not 10 minutes later, my mother was there, face like thunder. "How dare you speak to your sister that way," she hissed. "After all we've done for you." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "All you've done for me? That's a joke, right? You've done nothing but ignore me my entire life." But it was useless. In their eyes, I was always going to be the villain. The unwanted child who dared to want more. That night, as Marco and I lay in bed in a nearby hotel, because of course, my old room was now a home gym for my sister, I made a decision. "Let's go home," I said softly. "Back to Italy. This isn't my home anymore. It hasn't been for a long time." Marco pulled me close, his warmth a comfort in the cold reality of my family's indifference. "Okay," he said simply. "Let's go home." As we boarded the plane the next day, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief to be leaving the toxicity behind, sadness for the family I never really had. Back in Italy, life slowly returned to normal. Marco and I threw ourselves into wedding planning, determined to create the perfect day. But the visit home had left a bitter taste in my mouth, a reminder of all I'd left behind. "Are you sure about this?" Marco asked one evening as we sat on our balcony, the sun setting over the Tuscan hills. "Not inviting your sister, I mean." I took a sip of wine, letting the rich flavor roll over my tongue before answering. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said finally. "After what happened. I can't have her there, Marco. I won't." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. What I didn't tell him was about the messages. The explicit, inappropriate messages my sister had been sending him on social media since we'd left. I'd seen them by accident one day when using his phone. He'd been too embarrassed, too kind to tell me. But I knew. And it was the final straw. 6 months flew by in a whirlwind of cake tastings, venue visits, and dress fittings. Before I knew it, we were just weeks away from the big day. There was just one last thing to do. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone and dialed the number I still knew by heart, even after all these years. "Oh, Daisy. What is it?" "We're rather busy at the moment." My mother's voice, distracted as always. I swallowed hard, pushing down the hurt. "I'm calling about the wedding. I booked your flights and hotel. Everything's paid for. We'd love for you and Dad to come." There was a pause, then, "That's nice, dear. But what about your sister? We haven't received an invitation for her." I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "She's not invited, Mom. After what happened during our visit, and the messages she's been sending Marco. I don't want her there." "Messages? What messages?" My mother's voice had an edge to it now. "The explicit ones, Mom. The ones she's been sending my fiancé. It's inappropriate and disrespectful. I won't have that drama at my wedding." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in my mother's head, trying to find a way to excuse my sister's behavior, to make me the bad guy once again. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your sister would never do such a thing. Daisy, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. For once in my life, I'm putting myself first. You and Dad are welcome to come. The flight details will be emailed to you. I hope you'll be there." She didn't say anything and just hung up. The morning of my wedding day dawned bright and beautiful. Everything was perfect, the flowers, the music, the food. Everything except for the 2 empty seats in the front row. As the hours ticked by and guests began to arrive, a knot formed in my stomach. Where were they? Surely they couldn't do that to me. "Marco," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Can we delay the ceremony a bit? I need to make a call." His eyes filled with understanding and sympathy. "Of course, amore. Take all the time you need." With shaking hands, I dialed my mother's number. It rang, and rang, and rang. Just as I was about to give up, there was a click. "Hello?" My mother's voice, groggy and irritated. "Mom, where are you? The wedding's about to start." There was a pause, then, "Daisy, do you have any idea what time it is here?" "We were sleeping. It's the middle of the night." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Sleeping? But the wedding. You were supposed to be here. I sent you the tickets, the hotel information, everything." "Oh, that." Her voice turned cold. "Well, we decided not to come. Your sister is having her housewarming party today. We couldn't miss that." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her housewarming? But she's known about my wedding date for months. Why would she schedule it for today? Don't be selfish, Daisy. The world doesn't revolve around you. Besides, how could you expect us to go to one daughter's celebration and not the others? If you had invited your sister like you should have. Mom, I cut her off, my voice hard. You know why I didn't invite her. After what she did. That's all in your head, Daisy. Your sister would never do such a thing. You've always been jealous of her, always trying to make her look bad. I laughed, a bitter sound. Jealous? Is that what you think this is about? God, Mom, do you even hear yourself? Don't take that tone with me, young lady. This is your own fault. Your sister's party is none of my business, I finished for her. Just like my wedding is clearly none of yours. Goodbye, Mom. Enjoy the party. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking but my resolve firm. I looked at myself in the mirror, took a deep breath, and made a decision. And so, I walked down the aisle alone. No father to give me away, no mother to shed a tear. But as I looked at Marco, standing there with love shining in his eyes, I realized I didn't need them. I had everything I needed right here. Time has a way of healing wounds, or at least numbing them. Marco and I built a life together, full of love, laughter, and success. We'd both climbed the corporate ladder, our hard work paying off in promotions and accolades. We traveled, we made friends, we created a home. My parents never reached out. No congratulations on our wedding, no holiday greetings, nothing. And after a while, I stopped expecting them to. I stopped checking my phone on my birthday, stopped hoping for a Christmas card. It was easier that way. Then, on a random Tuesday in April, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number with a very familiar area code. My hometown. Hello? I answered, my heart pounding. Daisy, is that you? My mother's voice, sounding older, more tired than I remembered. Daisy, we need your help. And so the story came out. The company my parents had worked for, the one they'd sacrificed everything for, including their relationship with me, had gone bankrupt. They were out of work, with no savings to fall back on. We've always lived well, you know that, my mother said, a note of desperation in her voice. We know we haven't been good parents to you. But we need help, please. I closed my eyes, conflicting emotions warring inside me. Anger at their past treatment, satisfaction at their comeuppance, pity for their situation, and a small, traitorous spark of hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment they'd finally see me, value me. Okay, I said finally. I'll help. How much do you need? The figure she named made me wince, but I could afford it. Marco and I had done well for ourselves, after all. I made the transfer immediately, a mix of emotions swirling in my chest. It's done, I told her. The money should be in your account soon. Over the next few months, the pattern continued. Text messages would arrive, always asking for money. The amounts were smaller now, but the requests were frequent. And every time, like a fool, I sent the money. After one such transaction, Marco found me staring at my phone, a wry smile on my face. They asked for money again, he asked gently. I nodded. And again, I sent it. God, when did I become such a sucker? Marco sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. You're not a sucker, amore. You're kind. It's not your fault they can't see what an amazing daughter they have. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon when my world tilted on its axis once again. I was idly scrolling through Facebook, a cup of coffee in hand, when a photo stopped me cold. My parents, looking tanned and relaxed, cocktails in hand, lounging by a pool at what was clearly a very expensive resort. My hand shook as I clicked through more photos. There they were, dining at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Posing in front of a luxury spa. Living it up like they didn't have a care in the world. Like they hadn't been begging me for money for months. With a growing sense of dread, I navigated to my sister's page. What I saw there made my blood run cold. Photo after photo of her with a brand new sports car, at high-end bars, designer shopping bags piled around her. And the captions. Another amazing gift from the best parents in the world. Lucky me, only child. So blessed to have parents who would do anything for me. Spoiled and proud. And there, in the comments, were my parents. Liking every post. Commenting things like, nothing but the best for our little princess, and you deserve it all, sweetheart. I felt sick. The phone slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering to the floor. How could they? How dare they? As if on cue, my phone started ringing. It was them. With a deep breath, I answered. Daisy, dear, my mother's voice dripped with fake sweetness. We were wondering when you might be sending the next transfer. Life's been so hard, you know. We're thinking of renovating the house, it's gotten so old and dreary. Something in me snapped. Hard? I've seen the photos, Mom. The resort, the restaurants, the gifts for my sister. How dare you? There was a pause, then my mother's voice turned cold. Now you listen here, we gave you life. I could have had an abortion, you know. But we chose to have you. You owe us everything. Now, about that money. I didn't let her finish. I hung up, my whole body shaking with rage and hurt. The phone immediately started ringing again. And again, and again. Text messages flooded in, alternating between guilt trips and demands. I turned the phone off. Over the next few weeks, my parents continued to call and message. Demanding money, then pleading, then threatening. I ignored it all. I blocked their numbers, unfriended them on social media, cut off every avenue they had to reach me. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of guilt. But every time I wavered, I remembered those photos. Those comments. The cruel words my mother had spat at me. Years passed, and life continued to evolve. Marco and I had built a successful life in Europe, but something was calling us back to the States. Maybe it was nostalgia, or maybe it was the desire to start a family of our own in familiar surroundings. Whatever the reason, we made the decision to return to my hometown. We quickly settled into our... Your sister made it out, but the house, it's gone, Daisy. Completely destroyed. I sat there, stunned. The house I grew up in, the site of so many conflicting memories, reduced to ashes because of my sister's carelessness. That's not even the worst part, my friend added. Turns out your parents let the insurance lapse. They've lost everything. A part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction, quickly followed by guilt for feeling that way. But mostly, I felt nothing. They had made their choices, just as I had made mine. Life went on. Marco and I focused on our careers, our home, our future. Then, one sunny Saturday morning, a knock on the door changed everything. I opened it to find my parents standing there. They looked older, worn down. The designer clothes and perfectly coiffed hair were gone, replaced by shabby, outdated outfits and graying, unkempt locks. Daisy, my mother said, her voice trembling. We need your help. I stood there, frozen, as they poured out their tale of woe. Living in a cramped, rented apartment. Struggling to make ends meet. No savings, no support from their own parents, unable to find work at their age. And your sister, my father added, his voice bitter. We asked to stay with her, in the apartment we bought her. She kicked us out. Said she didn't have room for old people. A part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. The golden child, turning on them just as they had turned on me. But the laugh died in my throat as I looked at their desperate faces. Please, Daisy, my mother pleaded. We have nowhere else to go. You're our only hope. For a moment, I was tempted. The little girl inside me, the one who had always craved their love and approval, wanted to throw open the door and welcome them in. But then... You owe us this, my mother said, her tone shifting from pleading to demanding. After all, I could have aborted you. You owe us your life. And just like that, the spell was broken. I felt a calm settle over me, a certainty I had never known before. No, I said, my voice steady and clear. I don't owe you anything. Not for giving birth to me, not for the years of neglect, not for choosing my sister over me time and time again. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. Now, I'm asking you to leave. If you don't, I'll call the police. My father tried to step forward, but I stood my ground. I mean it, I said. Leave, now, and don't come back. They left, hurling insults and threats as they went. I closed the door, leaning against it as tears finally came. Not tears of sadness or regret, but of relief. Of closure. That night, I called my grandparents. They had always been there for me, even from a distance. They listened as I poured out the whole story, offering words of comfort and support. You did the right thing, Daisy, my grandmother said. You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Especially those who wouldn't even notice if you burned. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The last ties to my toxic past had been severed. The future stretched out before me, bright and full of possibility.
Your severance pay is 20 cents, as per the work rules. 20 cents for 20 years. Chris said he paid it out of his own pocket, smiling broadly. I tried to bite back, thinking it couldn't be the work rules. But when I looked at the company rules Chris handed me, the severance pay was clearly stated as 20 years of service or more. I can't believe they would set up such a sneaky arrangement to force an employee they don't like to resign. A wave of intense anger surged through me. Well, if that's how they want to play, I've got my own ways to handle it. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, as they say. I suppressed my agitation and coldly stated, "I will resign as per the company rules. My name is Tom Wilson, and I just turned 46. I'm currently working an office job at a trucking company in a small town in Nebraska. I've always had an interest in computers. So after graduating from a technical school for information processing, I landed a job at an IT firm in New York. But the relentless workload eventually took its toll, and I became utterly exhausted. In my 5th year at the company, my health broke down. This became the turning point for my decision to move to a small town. Rather than being swept away by the hectic city life, I wanted to live a more relaxed life in the countryside. At first, I searched for a job where I could use my IT skills, but I couldn't find a company that matched my expectations. There were no companies in this town willing to hire me as a systems engineer. So, I decided to let go of my job preferences and started looking for any job that was available. That's how I ended up at the company I'm with now. At the trucking company where I got hired, I did anything and everything I could. Whether it was helping with accounting, ordering materials, managing operations, or even finding new clients. The CEO at that time was someone who embraced ideas without being bound by traditional thinking and actively incorporated suggestions from employees. With the help of such an open corporate culture, the value of my existence increased with each passing day. I realized that I had been with the company for 20 years. Now, I'm at the core of the company. Since deciding to live in the countryside, I've never been too concerned about income. I'm a free-spirited bachelor, so as long as I could do some work and live comfortably in a nice town, I was satisfied. I just want to contribute to the company in any way I can and keep living in this town for as long as possible. Thinking this way, I began quietly developing systems during my private time and gradually integrated them into the company's operations to improve efficiency. These systems have now become essential as the company's core infrastructure. Since I developed them on my personal computer and brought them directly to the company. The CEO felt embarrassed, but I never intended to receive any compensation. I don't have any hobbies of my own, so playing with computers is like my only hobby. If it could help the company, then that's how I lived back then. But I soon faced a situation that shook this way of thinking. It happened about 2 years ago. The CEO suddenly fell ill and passed away. He had 2 sons. The eldest, Chris, worked at a company in New York, while the younger, David, worked at the same trucking company. Chris didn't have a good relationship with his father and was distant, so it was assumed that David would naturally take over. However, upon hearing of his father's death, Chris suddenly stepped forward as the successor. It seems that a combination of his divorce and his father's sudden passing sparked his ambition to take over the family business. This sparked a struggle for succession. A bit of turmoil erupted within the company. Nevertheless, the majority of the employees favored David, who had the president's wishes in mind, and it was thought that the decision would be made easily. However, when the CEO's wife threw her support behind Chris, the situation took a sudden and dramatic turn. Chris was appointed as the new CEO. The fact that the CEO's wife had served as the company's executive vice president likely influenced the decision. Naturally, Chris and David clashed. David is popular among employees, and Chris has his mother on his side. David expressed dissatisfaction with Chris's methods, but Chris suppressed him by force. Once again, the outcome favored Chris, and David, who had been in opposition, was forced out of the company. Like many employees, I was disheartened. The previous CEO had favored a conservative management style, gradually growing the company over time. I'm convinced that this steady approach was well suited for a trucking company in a small town. However, Chris, who had just taken over as CEO, decided to overhaul the previous methods and pursue rapid expansion. This led to a sudden increase in the number of vehicles owned, and accordingly, the staff was also expanded. As the number of vehicles increased, so did the revenue. However, due to the sudden push for capital investment, the company's debt surged. Additionally, the decline in profit margins worsened the financial situation. Chris's attempt to force an urban-style business plan onto a company that had thrived on a conservative approach created serious problems. This situation drastically changed my working environment. While employees dissatisfied with Chris's methods began leaving in droves, new hires came in one after another. This completely changed the atmosphere of the company. With the decline in long-standing employees, I started noticing signs that they wanted to push me out as well. Since I was so steeped in the previous president's way of thinking. One evening, I was summoned to the CEO's office. There, I ended up having a heated argument with Chris. He demanded that I support his expansion plan, while I, filled with a sense of impending crisis, warned that this path would lead the company to ruin. The discussion reached an impasse. Given the current situation, expanding operations is reckless. There aren't as many clients in the countryside as in the city. Let's go back to basics and rebuild our foundation. I passionately argued my case. Having worked at this company for 20 years, I felt I should stand firm on the sound arguments backed by my experience. However, he outright rejected my stance. I'm not going to end my career at some crappy trucking company in this backwater town. I'm going to hit the big city and make a killing. If there are no clients in this town, we'll go find them elsewhere. The strong are the ones who win in the end. I understood that Chris had high ambitions. But to expand, we needed a solid foundation. Building a grand structure on weak ground would only lead to its collapse. We're too weak to venture into the city. If we keep expanding like this, we'll soon face serious cash flow problems. It's not too late to reconsider. Please think it over again. I told him that the company would go out of business before it could venture into the city. But he was having none of it. The bank will lend us as much money as we need. As long as we keep increasing sales, we'll be fine. We just need to step on the gas. You have no idea what real business is like because you've been stuck in the slow-paced life of the countryside. If you've got a problem with it, then quit. Chris dismissed anyone who opposed him with a hardline attitude. Many employees had already left because of this. I realized that the time had finally come, and I prepared myself to resign. I loved this town, and the company had been a comfortable place for me. I had hoped to stay in this environment forever, but what I once sought was no longer here. It might be tough to find another job in this town, but anywhere would be better than staying here. Understood. I can't follow your direction any longer. Thank you for everything over the years. As I told him, Chris gave a sinister grin. So you're quitting, though I haven't done anything for you these past years anyway. Take this. Chris pulled out a brown envelope from his desk drawer and shoved it toward me. When I took it, I felt a slight weight in the otherwise blank envelope. What is this? I held the envelope up, and I could hear the faint sound of coins clinking inside. Open it up, you'll see. It's your severance pay. Now take it and get lost. He told me to open the package, and inside I found a piece of paper that looked like a memo pad and 20 cents. Handwritten on the paper is the amount of the severance payment, 20 cents. I couldn't believe my eyes at the absurdity. I've been with the company for 20 years, and this is my severance pay? Please stop joking. I said with a bitter smile, but Chris glared at me with a cruel look in his eyes. You say you've been here 20 years, but that was back when my old man was CEO. You haven't even worked a full year since I took over. So, there's no severance pay for you. But I felt a little sorry for you, so I gave you this from my own pocket. You should be grateful and take it. Chris smirked with a look of triumph. No way, the company rules say. I began to protest, but he cut me off. Your severance pay is 20 cents. Just as stated in the company rules. 20 cents for 20 years. Chris said he paid it out of his own pocket, grinning from ear to ear. I couldn't believe this could be in line with company rules, so I tried to argue. But when I looked at the company rules Chris handed me, the severance pay was clearly stated as 20 years of service or more. On the cover, the date of the last revision was stamped. It seemed that when Chris became CEO, he had the rules changed, with approval only from certain employees, reducing the required years for severance pay eligibility. To think he'd go to such underhanded lengths to force out employees he didn't like. A surge of intense anger welled up inside me. Well, if that's how he wants to play, I've got my own ways to handle it. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I suppressed my agitation and coldly stated, I will resign as per the company rules. At my words, Chris showed a momentary look of surprise, but quickly relaxed and spoke. I appreciate your understanding. Thank you for everything. Please take care. With that, he waved his hand dismissively, if to ward me off. He was probably pleased, thinking he had gotten rid of another nuisance. Since it was long past quitting time, everyone else had likely gone home. Alone in the empty office, I began packing up my personal belongings. I efficiently gathered everything from my desk and drawers and loaded them into my car. In just about an hour, the traces of my 20 years of service had vanished. As I stared at the empty desk, a sudden wave of sadness welled up inside me. But as soon as Chris's face flashed in my mind, those sentimental feelings evaporated. You'll regret this someday. With that thought buried deep in my heart, I drove home. After returning home, I made a phone call to someone. Over beers, we talked at length, and by the time I crawled into bed, I was so exhilarated that I couldn't help but grin. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing. Since I no longer needed to go to the company, I hadn't set my alarm clock. I checked the caller and found it was Chris. The moment I saw his name, I could picture the chaos likely unfolding at the company. What the hell do you think you're doing? The angry voice hit me as soon as I answered the call. Without saying a word, I hung up on him. It wasn't long before the phone rang again. Don't you dare hang up on me. Chris was shouting again. I figured he'd just keep calling back if I kept hanging up. So I put the phone on the table, leaving the call connected, and turned on the TV. Hey, don't ignore me. I know you're there. Pick up the phone. It's all your fault that everything's gone to hell. I could hear his voice coming through. I didn't need him to tell me because I already knew. I knew exactly what was happening at the company right now, and I was the one who caused it. Last night, I told Chris that I was quitting and took all my personal belongings home. This is the source of the trouble happening now. To explain, I had brought my personal computer to the company and used it as a server to run the internal systems. It's true that it could be seen as mixing personal and professional matters, but I did it out of goodwill. The previous CEO and Chris's younger brother, David, understood this and often expressed their gratitude. Tom, I'm really sorry for always relying on you. If we ask a company to set up a system like this, it would cost a fortune, right? Don't worry about it. It's my hobby. I'm just happy it helps the company. David and I were the same age and had a friendly relationship. So, I never hesitated to use my personal computer at work or to provide my custom-made systems. But that was because of my bond with the previous CEO and David. I don't feel any debt of gratitude to Chris, who would send me away with 20 cents in severance pay. In fact, I wanted nothing more than to see him brought down. Hey, I know you're listening. Get to the office right now and get the system running. Chris continued to shout. It sounded almost like a prisoner in a cage throwing a tantrum, which I found oddly amusing. I considered ignoring him for a while, but the noise was irritating, so I decided to respond. You don't need to shout as I can hear you just fine, I said lightly, causing Chris to raise his voice. What did you do to the company's system? Is this payback for your severance? Sabotaging the company is a crime. If you don't want to get sued, fix it right now. He has no idea what he's done. He forced me out without understanding the consequences. Well, it's time he learned just how foolish that decision was. With all due respect, I only followed the company's rules and took all my personal belongings home. I just took all of my personal belongings home with me, as per the company's work rules. I believe it is written in the revised work rules, isn't it? He choked on his words and must have a lot of things he can't sort out. In other words, you were all logging into my computer, which was acting as a server. Yesterday, I took that computer home. Of course, it was my personal computer. So it's no wonder it wasn't working. I said in a light tone, and I could hear a groan on the other end of the line. If I had retired under proper circumstances, I would have been fine with leaving the computer and system for you to use. But when you offer me a 20-cent severance, even I can't be that generous. You said the severance pay is in accordance with the work rules, so I complied with the work rules and was allowed to leave your company. I pressed on as he struggled to find words. Then, in a tone that sounded like he was trying to cover up, he said, "Is it money you want? Is that it? I'll pay you. How much? How much do you want?" Does he really think this is just about money? Chris's words only made me more stubborn. I don't want your money. I'm not about to take your money and start following your orders, I said firmly, and Chris's voice became strained. Just name your price. I'll buy the computer and system from you. How about $20,000? You can't complain about that, right? Offering $20,000 after saying he'd name my price. I was too shocked to even respond. I had no intention of selling it for any amount, but with that attitude, I figured I might as well have some fun with him. $20,000? You've got the wrong number of zeros. If you're really serious, how about $2 million? Then I might consider it. As I said while trying to hold back my laughter, his voice cracked. $2 million? Are you out of your mind? Who in their right mind would pay $2 million for that? Of course, he was right. I threw out a ridiculous number, knowing he couldn't pay it. So you can't pay that? Well, that's too bad. I guess we're done negotiating then. I coldly dismissed him, but he kept pushing. He must have been really desperate. But this is just the consequence of his own actions. By cutting off veteran employees one after another, he has put himself in a position where he has no choice but to rely on the system I built. Wait a minute. I can't pay you $2 million, but how about I rehire you? I'll even give you a raise, so bring the computer back right now. No one else in this town is going to hire you. I'm offering you a great deal. How could you complain? Even at this point, he still seems to think he holds the upper hand. It's time to make it clear to him. Sir, I think you're misunderstanding something. I've already secured a new job. We finalized everything last night. What? His voice trailed off in disbelief. The truth is, the person I called last night was Chris's brother, David. After being forced out by Chris, David had joined a major trucking company with branches all over the country. That company was opening a new branch in this town. David has been appointed as the director. He had the advantage of being able to bring over employees who were dissatisfied with Chris. And as someone with deep connections to various companies in this area's logistics industry, he had a strong network. In a short time, David had steadily built up his accomplishments and established a solid reputation. So it was easy for them to bring me on board. That's why I'm taking the system I built over to David's company. I don't know how much they'll use it, but it's better than leaving it with a company that offered me a 20-cent severance pay. So, you'll have to give up on my system. But don't worry, you'll manage without it. After all, everything used to be done manually back in the day, right? The fact that I was moving to David's company seemed to be a real blow to Chris. Given everything that had happened, he probably realized that there was nothing he could do now that I'd gone to his brother. Chris muttered something in a resigned tone and hung up the phone. I heard later that the chaos at the company lasted for over 3 months. During that time, revenue was cut in half. Eventually, they had to hire a contractor to customize an existing system, which finally helped them pull through the crisis. But it cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. You could say they paid the price for being stingy with my severance. As for me, I joined David's company and got back to the same kind of relationship we had before. Many of my new colleagues were former employees of Chris's company. So while the workplace has changed, the familiar atmosphere is returning. It was disappointing to only get 20 cents as severance, but I'm enjoying great benefits at my new job. Most importantly, I get to stay in this town and work in a place I'm happy with. Things couldn't have turned out better for me. Meanwhile, I'm hearing from David that Chris's company is going through a tough time. Chris's company is in pretty bad shape, David muttered as we shared a beer at a bar near the station. Both David and I are single, so we often find ourselves talking over beers like this. Has he said anything to you? I asked while picking at some edamame, and David shook his head. He'd heard about the trouble at Chris's company from a loan officer at the bank. Chris, who had ignored my warnings, continued with his expansion plans. That alone was a dangerous tightrope to walk. But when major transport companies entered the market, competition for shippers intensified, causing significant damage. The few months when the system wasn't operational caused sales to plummet, hitting the company's finances hard, like a body blow. All these issues compounded, leaving the company in a severe cash flow crisis. At the end of every month, they're scrambling to make payments. Every time, they're applying for short-term loans from the bank, but even that's reaching its limit. The bank's getting hesitant to lend any more money after reviewing their financials, he said, downing his beer with a bitter expression. If the bank refuses to lend even once, the company could bounce a check and face bankruptcy. It's clear that they're in a desperate situation. This is just comma. Yeah. Our voices trailed off, filled with a shared sense of gloom. I didn't care if Chris had to face the consequences of his actions. But it's heartbreaking to see the company that the previous generation built fall apart. David and I both wished we could at least save the company. That was our mutual feeling. But both of us were just regular employees now. We weren't in a position to influence or save another company. What if you talked to your headquarters? Maybe your company could do something, I suggested, and David's eyes lit up. I thought the same thing, so I spoke with headquarters about the possibility of acquiring Chris's company. As he stared at his beer, David's face gradually brightened. It turns out headquarters is keen on the idea. In exchange for taking on the debt of Chris' company, they will fully absorb the company into their group. If this deal goes through, it would lead to further expansion and allow them to dominate the delivery services in this area. The headquarters seems to be thinking along those lines. So, the issue is... I hesitated. Chris might mean nothing to me, but to David, he's still his brother. If the company is acquired, they won't be able to keep Chris around. No matter what's happened, could David really turn his back on his brother like that? That thought crossed my mind. Don't worry, I've never thought of Chris as my brother, not even once. David spoke with a twisted smile. It turns out there's no blood relation between him and Chris. David was separated from his parents at a young age, raised in an orphanage, and later adopted by the previous CEO. The late CEO doted on David, but his wife and Chris resented David, who suddenly came into their lives. David was mistreated by his adoptive mother and brother, and harbors only resentment toward them, with no familial affection whatsoever. When the previous CEO passed away, and the succession became an issue, it's likely that the previous president's wife supported Chris because of this backstory. To David, the only person he considers family is the late CEO. Then there's no hesitation. I looked into David's eyes, and he stared back at me with a clear, unwavering gaze. None at all. Knowing him, it won't be easy, Tom. I'm going to need your help. I nodded firmly. The plan to acquire Chris's company moved forward quickly. Initially, Chris had rejected the idea of an acquisition. But the situation changed dramatically when the bank threatened to cut off his loans. He found himself in a position where he could no longer resist. The offer we made to acquire the company was equivalent to its debt, but it didn't include Chris's personal loans. Apparently, when Chris became CEO, he took out loans to buy a condo and luxury cars. He probably thought that if he expanded the company quickly, everything would work out. These personal financial issues might have been driving his aggressive expansion strategy. Chris insisted on selling the company for an amount that would cover his personal debts and wanted to remain in a leadership role. On these points, David, who was handling the negotiations for our headquarters, clashed directly with Chris. As a result, a meeting was scheduled to discuss these matters. David asked me to attend with him, but since I had no reason to refuse, I gladly agreed. The meeting took place at Chris's company. It was the first time I faced him since the day he handed me that 20-cent severance. I'm not backing down. As soon as we exchanged brief greetings, he hit me with an opening punch. David and I exchanged glances. I don't think you're in a position to say that. If this deal falls through, you'll be stuck with all the company's debt. You should consider yourself lucky to avoid that. I kept my emotions in check and spoke calmly. Chris's face turned red with anger. Who do you think you are? Because of you, my company suffered huge losses. If it weren't for what you did, we could have ridden the wave of success. It seemed he was blaming the company's downfall on me for removing the computer and system. But that wasn't the only reason things had gone wrong. That's the consequence of your own actions. Even without that incident, the outcome would have been the same. Your reckless management led to the collapse. I remained composed, refusing to rise to his provocation. He then turned his attention to David. What about you, David? Are you just going to follow his lead? I'm your brother, of course. You'll be on my side, right? Chris sneered as he glared at David. David dropped his gaze to the table. He had said he never thought of Chris as a brother. But they were still siblings, after all. It's not something he could easily dismiss. So, it was up to me to take the lead. Sir, you have no right to negotiate. Your only choice is to accept our offer or reject it. If you reject it, our company will immediately withdraw, and you'll be left to deal with the company's debt and sink with it. That's all there is to it. He clicked his tongue in frustration. But realizing how dire his situation was, he changed his attitude and looked at me with pleading eyes. Can't you really include my personal debts? You're a big company. Surely you can do that much. No, we cannot. I responded without hesitation. Seeing that he couldn't sway me, Chris tried to find a compromise. Then at least let me stay on as president. If I lose my position, I won't be able to pay off my loans. Surely you can do that much, right, David? Realizing that appealing to me was useless, Chris turned his gaze toward David. David kept his head down, refusing to look up. Come on, David. We're brothers, aren't we? I'll do whatever you say under your company. It's a win-win. We're family, so let's stick together and make this work. Seeing Chris talk so nonchalantly, anger welled up inside me. How could he be so low as to invoke the bond of brothers just to play on David's sympathy? I looked closely at David's face. It was filled with anguish. Don't do it, David. If you compromise now, it'll tarnish your reputation. I thought to myself. Then David, who had been staring at the floor, suddenly lifted his head. A slight smile began to form on his face. Chris looks puzzled by this change. That's the David I know. I knew you were smart. You're not like this stubborn fool sitting here. Let's team up and get things done. Chris rambled on, convincing himself that David's demeanor was a sign of support. He extended his right hand toward David. David just stared at that hand. A few seconds of silence passed, and as David slowly reached out his hand, a feeling of despair washed over me. It seemed that breaking the bond between brothers was impossible after all. But just as that thought crossed my mind, David suddenly slapped Chris's hand away with a sharp smack. "What the hell are you doing?" Chris's eyes went wide in shock, darting around in confusion. "Brothers, I've been quietly listening to your nonsense, but enough is enough. I've never once thought of you as my brother. You think you can stay on as president? Don't make me laugh. Who do you think destroyed Dad's company? You're fired, effective immediately, and your severance, 2 cents, in honor of your short tenure as CEO. I'll even pay it myself here." David pulled 2 cents from his pocket and tossed them at Chris. The force of David's words made Chris recoil. He tried to say something, but his lips trembled and no words came out. He was clearly terrified by the determination David had just shown. With that, the matter was settled. Confident that the situation was now under control, I straightened my suit collar and spoke firmly. "We'll finalize the contract on another day. Please prepare the necessary documents. For now, we'll take our leave." With that, I left the room with David. As I closed the door and glanced back, Chris was sitting there, pale and staring blankly into space. Realizing that his last hope had been cut off and he was out of options, Chris must have finally understood the dire situation he was in. "Thank you, Tom. You were incredible." David and I shook hands firmly before leaving the room. A few days later, the official contract was signed. I had been wary that Chris might cause more trouble, but surprisingly, he agreed to the deal without resistance. Perhaps seeing David's intense determination made him realize that there was no point in fighting. As a result, our company successfully brought Chris's company under our control. Meanwhile, Chris and his mother, who served as executive vice president, were dismissed and forced out of the company. Although the company's debt was taken care of through the acquisition, Chris was left with his personal debts. To pay them off, he sold all of his valuable assets, including his condo and cars. Even after liquidating everything, he couldn't cover all his debts, so his mother's assets were also used. It turns out that Chris's extravagant lifestyle had been quite excessive. Given the small-town environment, news of their downfall spread quickly. They became the subject of gossip wherever they went. And eventually, unable to bear the shame, the two of them disappeared without a trace. Even now, they might be living in fear of debt collectors somewhere. After that, I was appointed as the branch manager following the headquarters decision. Apparently, I was recognized for my relationship with David and my active role in the acquisition plan. The trucking company that Chris had driven to the brink of collapse is now being led by David as its president. He quickly restored the company's environment, and with the support of the parent company, it now operates under a healthy management structure. Then we received more good news. The headquarters decided to build a massive logistics warehouse in this town. With the opening of the highway interchange, this town will be positioned as a key distribution hub. This development is expected to lead to even greater growth. Moving forward, David and I will continue to work together, contributing to the company. Above all, the greatest joy is that we were able to preserve the trucking company that the late CEO built in this town.